Welcome to the deep dive. We've gone through just a mountain of sociological source material, everything from the foundational terms to some pretty cutting-edge meta-theory.
Yeah, a lot to get through.
And our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
We want to rapidly synthesize the hidden scripts, the performances, and the deep structures that really shape your daily life and, the whole fabric of society.
We're trying to find the architecture of reality.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that architecture it's vast. If you try to even get a foothold in sociology, you realize pretty quickly how much specific vocabulary you need just to start categorizing the human experience.
Oh, absolutely. The first layer is just classification.
Right. You immediately run into the difference between, say, ascribed status. That's the social position you're born into, like your gender or ethnicity.
Versus achieved status.
Exactly. The position you earn through effort, like getting a medical degree or something.
But the vocabulary, it goes so much deeper. It starts touching on these really fundamental problems of modern life. You've got classic concepts like Durkheim's Anomie.
Which is that feeling of normlessness, right?
Yeah.
When society's goals just feel impossible.
It's total disconnection. And that sits right alongside something like Weber's Iron Cage, which, describes how modern bureaucracies, which are supposed to be efficient, actually trap us in these rational, kind of stifling systems of control.
And then the sources throw in concepts that feel so current. Things that let us put a name to what's happening today.
Like what?
Well, terms like luxury belief, which is this idea of beliefs that give status to the wealthy but actually end up hurting people who try to adopt them without the same resources. Or even neurodiversity, which reframes cognitive differences.
So sociology gives us the lenses we need to stop just, reacting to things.
Yeah.
And start actually naming the forces at play.
Right. And all this complex terminology, it really orbits this one single crucial philosophical tension that kind of guides all of social science. The relationship between structure and agency.
The big one.
Okay, so let's just dive into that tension right away. On one side, you have structure. These are the massive, large-scale forces, social patterns, laws, institutions like the government, the economy, all the things that fundamentally constrain and shape what you can and can't do.
And when sociologists are looking at that scale, at society as a whole, they're doing what we call macro-sociology.
Focusing on big theories like structural functionalism or conflict theory.
And then on the other side, you have agency, which is, the individual's capacity to act independently, to push back, to make choices, to exercise some kind of free will.
And that's microsociology. Zooming in on individual interactions, looking through a lens like symbolic interactionism.
So if we put those two together, where does that leave you, the listener? Are you a free agent, or are you basically just a predictable product of the systems you were born into?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, what's so important to understand is that they're not mutually exclusive. Not at all. They interact constantly. You're profoundly shaped by structure, where you live, your economic background, the laws you live under, but that doesn't mean you're without agency.
Right. Individuals acting together, they can use their agency to challenge and even transform those structures. That's what social movements are.
It's the engine of historical change.
So the core question isn't whether structure exists. Of course it does. But how much room it leaves you to maneuver. And to really feel the weight of that tension, I think we need to start where agency seems most present in our daily interactions.
Let's do it.
So here's where we get into the messy reality of the person you project every single morning. We start small with Erving Goffman, who is, arguably one of the most insightful microsociologists ever.
For sure. He looked at social life not just as a setting for interaction, but as a full-blown theater.
He built his whole theory, dramaturgical sociology, on the idea that the methods we use to navigate our daily lives, how we manage impressions, create a shared reality, are basically identical to what actors do on a stage.
It's all a performance.
And what's so radical is what Goffman says about the self. He argues the self is not some stable thing tucked away inside of you, just waiting to be revealed.
No, instead, the self. It arises dynamically, it's temporary, and it comes out of the process of performance. Your true nature is just the sum of all the roles you successfully play.
Which completely shifts the unit of analysis, right?
Yeah.
The focus isn't the individual anymore.
It's the team. It's the group of people cooperating to project a unified, consistent impression of reality to whatever audience is watching.
Okay, so how do we manage this impression? He talks about these tools. Sign vehicles. Let's start with roles.
Yeah, so take a professional role, like an insurance agent. They're not just selling you a policy. Their main job is to project this contrived sense of being dedicated and knowledgeable.
often just to counteract that public stereotype of being, untrustworthy or sleazy.
Exactly. Their performance is defensive from the get-go.
And then you have the scripts. Most of our daily conversation is improvised, but some performances need formalization. The sources mention the really strict verbal control over Disney Store employees.
The cast members.
Right. They're given these verbatim scripts, like explicitly told, "Hi, welcome to the Disney Store." And that's it. No variations, ever.
It's a mechanism to make sure every single employee creates the exact same homogeneous fantasy experience.
But the script isn't just about fantasy, it's about control. I'm thinking of car salespeople.
Oh, that's a perfect example. They use a kind of loosely scripted, multi-stage process, contact, pitch, not just to sell you the car, but to expertly size you up, figure out what you value, and find the exact lever to pull to get control of the decision.
And you can't forget the visual part, costumes and appearance. I mean, that's the fastest way to form an impression.
For sure. The insurance agent needs to suggest professionalism, conservatism, stability. So, sober suits, maybe a gold watch.
Well, the Disney uniform, the pink shirts, blue cardigans, that's all designed specifically to evoke a kind of wholesome nostalgia.
And finally, you need a stage. The physical environment that's used to control the audience's reaction. Goffman splits this in two.
The front stage, which is what the audience sees, the perfectly curated Disney store with its themed music and props, all there to sustain the fantasy.
And then there's the backstage. This is the sanctuary. It's where the performers can drop their roles, vent, store their props, and emotionally regroup away from the audience.
That's like an essential safety valve, right, to deal with the exhaustion of being on all the time.
Exactly. But what happens when the manipulation of that space becomes the performance itself?
You're talking about that cynical tactic car dealers use, the changing sides thing.
It's a perfect example of Goffman in action, being used for advantage. The salesperson leaves you waiting while they go into the sales office, the supposed private backstage, to get the deal approved.
And you, the customer, think you're watching a real debate over the numbers.
But in reality, the manager and the salesperson might just be having a smoke, talking about lunch, just prolonging the wait.
So they're using the physical space and the impression of a backstage to make the customer feel like an insider.
Precisely. And when the salesperson comes back and says something like, "Wow, I sure got in a lot of trouble for you," the customer feels like they drove this incredibly hard bargain, and they accept the deal happily.
So Goffman saw that this play within a play makes the customer feel secure and smart right at the moment they're about to be financially diddled.
Yeah. So the first big takeaway here is that your daily life is less about you being you, and it's a lot more about you being the performer required by the room.
That makes me wonder, though, if the self only arises in performance, does that just make the whole idea of an authentic self totally meaningless? And God, how exhausting is that constant effort?
Well, it leads directly to the problem of sincerity and what's called emotional labor. Performers have to choose if they're being sincere, meaning they actually believe in their role.
Or cynical, meaning they don't believe it, but they're playing the part anyway.
And you see this so clearly in jobs that require intense emotional labor, like flight attendants. Their role is so tightly circumscribed, they have to project pleasantness and constant reassurance, managing and suppressing their own feelings, even when they're tired or being hit on.
And the airlines try to foster sincerity in them, right, by asking them to see passengers as personal guests or even children, hoping to make that affection genuine instead of forced.
But when there's a conflict between role expectations, like Disney clerks are told to give quality service but are only rewarded for sales quantity, they start to experience role distance.
They just dissociate from the role.
Yeah, and that leads to cynicism, self-blame, and eventually burnout.
Okay, so we've established our micro-interactions are staged performances. But let's shift focus. What defines the rules of the stage itself, and who gets the best seats in the house? That brings us to the deeper internalized structures, this concept of capital that goes way beyond just money, from Pierre Bourdieu.
Bourdieu offers this just critical framework for understanding social stratification. He argues that wealth isn't just about cash. It's about three primary forms of capital that together determine your standing and your access in what he calls the social field.
The first one is the one everybody gets, economic capital. Money, property, inherited income, all the tangible stuff.
The second is social capital. This is the collective value of your contacts, your networks, your relationships. The sources give a great parallel with the Chinese concept of guangxi.
Which is that deep reciprocal relationship you can call on to solve a problem, often by bypassing the official systems.
Exactly. And the third, and this is maybe the most subtle, is cultural capital. This is the value that's associated with culturally authorized tastes, skills, knowledge, credentials, like a degree from a particular university. It's all about what kinds of knowledge and behavior are seen as legitimate in a society.
What's critical, though, is that these capitals are transformational but non-replaceable.
Right. Economic capital can buy you an education, which gives you cultural capital, which in turn can expand your social capital. They transfer, but the value of one can't just be swapped out for the same value in a different context.
The sources have that excellent example of the Chinese medicine doctor, the DCM. In China, a DCM's qualifications and experience, its extremely high cultural capital converts very easily into high economic capital.
But if that same doctor moves to a Western country, say the U.S., that cultural capital isn't privileged in the same way at all.
Right. The medical field in the U.S. privileges a totally different kind of knowledge, so the DCM's qualifications just aren't easily convertible to the same level of economic success or social status.
It really demonstrates that the value of what you know is entirely dependent on the field you're performing in.
And the accumulation of all this capital over time, that's what shapes the deep ingrained structures inside us that Bourdieu called habitus.
Habitus, it's a system of durable, unconscious dispositions. It reflects your entire class condition, your cultural history, your values, your education, all of it incorporated into your very being. It's in your body language, your speech patterns, your unconscious assumptions.
It's the prism through which you instinctively see the world.
Pretty much. And this habitus shows up most publicly in taste. Taste in food, art, music, clothes. It's not some innate preference. It's cultivated through your family and education, and its main function is distinction. It separates higher classes from lower classes.
Higher classes historically cultivated taste for quality, nutrition, maybe artistic appreciation, abstract art, classical music, that kind of thing.
While lower classes, who are dealing with immediate necessity, often have to prioritize quantity and survival. And these subtle differences in taste, they reinforce social stratification because people instinctively build friendships and marry people who share a similar habitus, a similar background.
This sounds incredibly deterministic, though. I mean, if my taste, my body language, my whole instinctual way of understanding the world was programmed into me by my habitus since I was a kid, how much room does that leave for individual effort?
Well, the sources address this by talking about gambling on education. Even when a lower-class family invests a huge amount of economic capital to get their child into a high-status university, that child's ingrained habitus, maybe a conversational style that's too direct, or an unease with certain social rituals, might still subtly disqualify them from the highest levels of success.
So the structure of your class history is just deeply internalized.
Yeah.
And it's resistant to simple individual effort.
It's very resistant.
Okay, so we've moved from the staged observable performance of Goffman to the internalized class structures that define our tastes and opportunities with Bourdieu. Now, let's zoom out to the most abstract level of constraint, the invisible, circulating systems of power and knowledge themselves, as described by Michel Foucault.
This is a huge jump. If habitus is the internalized instruction manual, Foucault is talking about who built the printing press that produces those manuals. He gives us the concept of discourse.
And discourse is not just polite conversation.
Not at all. Discourse is a system of representation that governs what can be acceptably talked about, reasoned about, and even thought about in any specific historical moment. It defines, it rules, and it fundamentally restricts how knowledge is even constructed.
So knowledge and truth aren't absolute constants. They're culturally and historically specific products of a regime of truth. And Foucault says that power isn't just top-down. It's not just the state or the police.
No, power is decentralized. It circulates like a net-like organization. It functions as a microphysics of power, regulating people's conduct not through brute force, but through subtle rules, training, disciplines, professional standards.
So like how academic publishing standards dictate what counts as legitimate knowledge.
Or how social media platforms use rules to regulate public conduct.
Exactly.
And the implication for you, the individual listener, is profound. Foucault basically rejects the idea of the autonomous agent. He argues that the subject is actually produced or subjected by this discourse and the regime of power knowledge.
You become the subject that's defined by the very system that structures your thought.
And if we're going to acknowledge that these power structures are constantly shaping and limiting individuals, we have to view them through the modern sociological lens of intersectionality.
Yeah, a crucial concept. Coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, it recognizes that social relations involve multiple intersecting forms of discrimination, sexism, racism, ableism, classism, and that these forces compound disadvantage. The data on this is stark. The sources cite a COVID-19 impact study from Bosnia and Herzegovina. While 67% of urban women reported a financial decline during the pandemic, that number jumped to 79% for rural women.
Disadvantage isn't just additive, it's multiplicative when you hold multiple marginalized identities.
This density of overlapping structures, constraints, and discourses, it leads us to this fascinating philosophical problem that sociologists face. Can we actually build a general social theory that explains everything?
Well, social theorists follow the principle of parsimony. Occam's razor. They're always looking for the simplest theory that explains most information. Talcott Parsons famously tried to create this abstract general theory of everything.
That didn't quite work out.
No. Many modern theorists now stick to what they call theories of the middle range, just focusing on smaller, specific areas.
But where's the theoretical ceiling? This is where the sources get really meta, drawing on insights from algorithmic information theory and Kurt Gödel's work.
They suggest that if you treat social phenomena as complex data, the sheer complexity of the social world is practically infinite.
It's like computer scientists saying the world is too complex to zip into a single, perfectly functioning file.
That's a great way to put it. If social complexity is maximally unknowable, then it becomes impossible to capture all social phenomena completely into one single, logically coherent social theory.
So any attempt to describe everything fails because the description itself becomes almost as complex as the thing it's trying to describe.
That's the description trap. Theoretical work often trends toward a complexity that's similar to its object, and you end up with thousands of pages of dense jargon that add very little practical knowledge. The goal of parsimony just fails completely.
So if a perfect, all-encompassing theory is impossible, where does modern sociology go from here?
They're turning toward computational sociology, using methods like agent-based modeling. This synergizes deductive reasoning with really rigorous empirical inquiry. The goal shifts from trying to get a perfect, elegant description
To achieving better explanation and predictability, but within limited domains.
Exactly.
So what does this whole deep dive mean for you as the learner? We started with the basic labels we use to describe society, and we discovered that even your most seemingly authentic interactions, whether you're on a plane or buying a car, are these meticulously choreographed performances, all designed to manage impressions, which is Goffman.
Then we found that your deepest, most innate beliefs about yourself, your cultural preferences, are unconsciously shaped by your class history and the systems of capital you've accumulated. That's Bourdieu's Habitus.
And finally, we realized that the very ideas you hold about truth, knowledge, and your own autonomy are defined and constrained by these invisible, circulating power relations, the discourse that governs what can and can't even be said. That's Foucault.
We are constantly being shaped, produced, and subjected by systems that are so overwhelmingly complex that they are fundamentally impossible to describe in one single, neat, complete theory.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you. If we accept that social structures are maximally unknowable and that the hunt for a perfect, absolute theory of society is fruitless, does the pursuit of a better social life become less about finding that one true formula, and maybe more about continuously recognizing and acting to transform the specific local structures that you operate within? We still have agency. How will you use it in the face of infinite complexity?